Good evening, everyone. We'll start in a minute. Folks, should we start?
Yes.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I'm Siddhi Dheer. I'm the Executive Director with TIE Singapore. Thank you for joining us for this virtual session where we have an interesting panel from across the globe talking about and discussing the opportunities and challenges in the Indian EV market. Rather, I should say good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from whichever part of the globe you've joined in today. This session is planned under the TIE Global Sustainability SIG. The moderator for this session is Girija Pandey. Girija is the chairman at Apex Avalon Consulting Private Limited, an ex-TIE board member and present charter member. Girija is also the co-chair of the TIE Global Sustainability SIG. Before I hand it over to him, a few housekeeping rules. Please type in your questions in the Q&A mode or the chat mode, whichever is open for you, and we'll take the questions after the panel discussion is over. Tentatively, we plan to have the panel discussion till 6:45. That's another 40 minutes, and then we'll open it for the questions to the floor. With that, Girija, over to you.
Thank you, Siddhi. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think Siddhi is just, this is very, very important. We've got a excellent topic, very contemporary topic of EVs, and then of course EV in India, which is expected to be one of the largest markets in a few years' time. So I think a lot of people have shown interest in this. This is part of our mobility and sustainability interest group. We have a interesting panel of speaker, and I will introduce them a little later. But there's some interesting things about EVs, and I was looking at it and talking to people. I mean, the first EV came in 1884, and in 1889, Frederick Porsche produced the EV, and there were fleets of cabs in Paris and New York. And actually, that was before the IC engine came in, and then the famous Ford T model came, and then the EVs disappeared and the IC engines took over. And now 100 years later, we are back to, so it's really an amazing story of a cycle which comes back. I mean, we all understand, I mean, Tesla is obviously known and everyone talks about, but it's an amazingly, not only is there a sustainability and a mobility advantage, we also have a far less number of moving parts. I mean, you know, an average powertrain of an IC engine can be 2,000 moving parts, with just 20 in an EV with 4 motors. I mean, that's all you need. So you're the ease of maintenance, the whole advantage. At the moment, the EV penetration is less than 1% globally. The growth is expected to be over 30%, reaching nearly 250 million by 2030. So you're seeing this is going to be a game changer for the auto industry and the urban mobility area. UBS predicts a completely decarbonized transportation industry by 2040. So people are projecting, and I think some of our panelists will talk about this, and nearly 49% of all car purchases by 2030 will be EVs. The two big markets will now be US, and Biden just announced a ramping up of EVs in the US, President Biden, to surpass China. And he hopes to spend $70 billion on EV and the charging infrastructure, and 100 billion in consumer subsidies to attract people into the EV market. And they also hope to have, the US also hopes to have 60% of all buses in US will be EV by 2025. China is the second, going to be the biggest market in EV. They've already sold 1.3 million, well ahead of others, versus only 300 something thousand in the US. Very good digital capabilities. They've got the data muscle in it. And of course, with 5G, the EV and the autonomous driving will become synonymous. The smart EV is going to be the next story as China projects. And there are some big Chinese manufacturers and device makers like Xiaomi and Huawei who are all wanting to get into the EV market. So these are two markets where we see. But let me not go on this because we have some panelists who know this much better than me. So let me quickly introduce the panelists. We've already sent you the detailed CV, so I'm not going to again repeat it, but just to say, the first panelist is Raju Bhinge. Rajiv Bhinge is a very senior corporate executive of the Tata Group with over 40 years of experience in various parts. He sits on many boards and has been very active in the corporate world, especially in the Tata Group. Of course, I must also add that Raju and I were classmates from the business school, so I've known him for more than 40 years. But I have always had a huge respect for his knowledge. Gopichand Katrigada is very well known. He's a doctorate, has many IPs in his name. He now runs his own company, Mylan, and I have known him as he was the CTO of Tata Sons, and before that at GE. He has a very amazing career with global companies, understands technology very well, and I think he's amazing ability to make technology simpler. I have always found. I used to serve on a board with Gopi, so I've known him. Ilan, our third speaker, Ilan Ben David, is a CTO and founder of Chakra Tech in Israel. He's in Israel, is also in TIE Israel as a charter member. So we have our charter member as one of our speakers. He has done a lot of work on fast charging. I've had an interesting discussion with him on fast charging and how he plans to see it. So without the charging infrastructure, obviously the EV system will never go. So that's as important. So these are the three speakers. Let us start with Raju Bhinge. He will give us an overview of the Indian EV market, the challenges, the opportunities that he sees, and then we will move on to Gopi and then on to Ilan. So Raju, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Girija. It's great to be here. I'll be giving you an overview of the market in India and what this disruption by electric vehicles, what it means in terms of challenges and opportunities. I'll start by talking about the automotive industry in India and where EVs stand. Then what are the constraints and challenges for EVs? What is the government policy? What is the outlook for EVs in India? And lastly, what are the opportunities and what are some of the responses from different players in this whole value system? So let me start with the auto industry. India has a large and diversified automotive industry, 4 broad segments. The first and the largest in terms of numbers is two-wheelers. India makes something like 21 million two-wheelers a year. Almost all of them are petrol engine vehicles, IC vehicles. And this makes India the largest producer of two-wheelers or IC two-wheelers in the world. India is also a large producer of three-wheelers, and the production is something like 700,000 per year. And I believe India is again one of the largest or the largest producer of three-wheelers. When it comes to passenger vehicles, India produces 3.4 million a year, which makes it the 4th largest market in the world. And in commercial vehicles, we produce 1 million units a year, which makes India the 7th largest producer in the world. Now, being a growing economy, each of these segments has its own growth rates. So when we talk of 2025 or 2030 and the penetration of EVs, we're talking of a base in each of these segments, which is pretty big. Now, compared to these large numbers, the penetration of EVs has been very small. In two-wheelers, for example, in the last couple of years, the average sales have been hardly 150,000 a year. That's less than 1%. And most of these are very low-cost and low-speed vehicles which go below 25 kilometers an hour. They don't need a license. They are not registered. So they are really outside the radar screen of the industry as a whole. In three-wheelers, out of 700,000, the penetration is about 100,000 units. because that's entirely a commercial proposition, and the economics, the unit economics of electric vehicles is obviously being seen. In passenger vehicles, last year we sold just 5,000 units on a base of 3.4 million, just a little over 1%. In commercial vehicles, the electric vehicle is still to come. So you can see we are at a nascent stage in India, even though a lot of development is happening across the world. So what are the constraints or challenges holding us back? So let me go through that. The first and biggest issue is that of price. The equivalent electric vehicle is 40 to 50% costlier than the IC vehicle. If you take an example like the Tata Nexon EV, the diesel Nexon is about 10 lakhs. The electric vehicle is about 14 to 15 lakhs. So straight away a 40, 50% difference for an absolutely equivalent vehicle. And a lot depends on closing this gap and getting price parity, which is the goal of the entire industry. And there are four levers through which this will be achieved. The first is the single costliest component in the electric vehicle, which is the battery. It accounts for 40 to 50% of the cost, and battery costs have been declining over the years. In 2010, battery cost was $1,000 per kilowatt hour. 2020, in 10 years, it went down 85% to something like $150 per kilowatt hour. In the next 5 years, there is talk of reaching a level of $65 per kilowatt hour. So once you get somewhere there, this price differential starts narrowing, and you can talk and think of price parity between electric and IC vehicles. The second factor or the second lever which will bridge the price gap is the development of dedicated EV platforms versus the repurposed platforms which you see today. For example, the Tata Nexon we talked about. It's basically a diesel or a petrol engine car. The engine has been taken out and you put the electric drive in there. But the rest of it is pretty much the same. So it is repurposed. Instead, if you have a dedicated, optimized EV platform, there will be cost reductions that will come through. The third is economies of scale. From 5,000, if you go to 500,000, obviously all the indirect costs and the cost economies will change. The fourth is partnerships. You see multiple companies getting together to develop various parts of the electric vehicle. So with this, the industry expects or is talking about achieving price parity between electric and IC vehicles in the next 3 to 5 years with all these things put together. The second constraint, which is holding back the sale of EVs, is the charging infrastructure or lack thereof. So whether it be slow or fast, private or public, we really are at a close to a zero stage, and it's a big requirement which needs to be filled in. And in fact, one could argue that the infrastructure has to precede the sale of EVs, because who'll buy an EV if he doesn't know how it's going to be charged? And the third is the whole anxiety about range and charging time, which to some extent will be addressed if the first 2 points are addressed in terms of the battery cost and capacity and the type of infrastructure you have, whether it is overnight charging or high-speed charging somewhere along a highway. Once those things fall into place and these three constraints are taken care of, I think we'll be ready for sales of EVs to take off in a big way. The next point I want to talk about is government policies. Government policy has been largely supportive in terms of pushing EV sales. The first and the most important policy we have in place is an incentive scheme. It is called FAME, Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of EVs. It gives a subsidy of roughly 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour of capacity for electric vehicles. There is also incentives and subsidies for charging infrastructure. So apart from FAME, you have a new policy recently called production-linked incentives. It applies to 13 sectors. 2 are of interest to our conversation today. One sector is advanced batteries, for which an incentive or a subsidy of 2 to 12% has been proposed, provided the production is in India and value addition is up to 60%. So it is meant to bring battery production into India. And the second is for auto and components, where for incremental exports and incremental output, again, an incentive will be paid. The third is labor laws. We have a complete new set of labor legislation a few months back, which have simplified and made things easier in terms of manufacturing and labor. Fourth, income tax. Earlier it used to be much higher, but today for manufacturing, for a new manufacturing venture, income tax is 17%. And if it is not new, it is 25% if the other exemptions are given up. So 25 and 17, quite competitive. Last I want to mention is ease of doing business. India used to be 142nd in 2014. 2019, it reached 63rd. And obviously there has been improvement, but there's a lot more to go. But the big change in policy will come in the next few months once the current discussions on climate change and what should be done to reduce carbon emissions, those discussions reach their logical conclusion. And India decides what targets to take on over the next 10, 20 years for carbon reduction. And I'm sure the policy changes will be beneficial for electric vehicles. So with these things, with these issues, what kind of future outlook do we look forward to? Price parity and charging infrastructure are the critical things which will cause an inflection point and a pickup in sales of EVs. So let's assume those two happen over the next 3 to 5 years. The other factor to keep in mind is the operating economics of electric vehicles. In India, the price of petrol and diesel is at a very high level. So when you switch over to electric, the operating cost per kilometer travel becomes roughly 1/5 of what it would cost with a IC engine. And that gives a huge benefit wherever the run per day is relatively high and if it is within a city. Now, whether it be fleet taxis, whether it be some of the pickup trucks and various other things that happen, and even for personal transportation within the city, operating costs plus price parity. Between these two, you have the basis for an inflection point somewhere around 3 to 5 years where sales will really take off. And you'll have the classic S curve of adoption, initially very slow, and then a very steep increase, and then a saturation. And that should happen in the 3 to 5 year period. So when you talk of 10 years, with all these things happening, what kind of numbers can one think about? In two-wheelers, we are already at 20-21 million per year. If, as in China today sells something like 10 million electric two-wheelers a year. So that's roughly half of what we have. So something of that order is certainly possible in 10 years' time. In the case of passenger cars, our sales today are 3.4 million. In 10 years, it may be twice the size. If you take 30 to 50% penetration by EVs, again, you're talking of sizable numbers, 2 million, 3 million a year. So these are the type of numbers that are possible. And the other thing I'd mention is that both in two-wheelers as well as four-wheelers, passenger cars, India has the potential and the opportunity of becoming a manufacturing and an export hub for the world. For two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers, because of the sheer size and scale of the local market and the manufacturing volumes and economies that are possible, and for the entry level and the mass market vehicles, the Swift and the Altos and the I-20 equivalents. If there is a cost-effective EV in that category, again, India can become a manufacturing hub for the entire world, apart from the local market. So given this outlook, let me talk about the opportunities and what are the responses from some of the major players. The biggest opportunity is obviously in the product itself, the vehicles themselves, whether it be two-wheelers, three-wheelers, or four-wheelers. I won't talk of commercial vehicles at this stage because that's still being developed and the first such vehicles are still to come out. So you see the existing incumbents are largely introducing new models in this space. In cars, the first models have come from the Tata Group and Mahindras. Tatas have the Nexon, the Tigor, Mahindra have the Verito, and we have announcements from Tesla to enter in 2021 with local sales as well as an engineering center. And if you see the current sales of EVs, the largest seller is in fact the Tata Nexon, and they're expecting much better pick up once the other factors fall into place. So far, no new entrant has come in, but who knows what to expect in future. In two-wheelers, it's a very different picture. The existing leaders, Bajaj and Hero, have both announced new plants to make electric two-wheelers. Hero has two subsidiaries for electric vehicles, Ather and Hero Electric. Each of them has capacities in the range of a few 100,000 each. Bajaj has just announced a capacity of 500,000 and launched the e-scooter under the brand name Chetak. Chetak is the old brand name Bajaj Auto has always had. They launched it and they made it only online booking. And you won't believe it, in 2 days' time, they had to stop further booking because the response was so overwhelming that it went far ahead of their supply planning. So electric vehicle, fully online booking, and they had to stop in 2 days. It shows something that's happening in terms of consumer behavior as far as two-wheelers are concerned, even at today's conditions of prices and infrastructure. But the big new announcement, the big player coming into this two-wheeler market is Ola. Ola has traditionally been in the taxi, in the mobility and the shared taxi business, but he is putting up a plant with a capacity of 10 million electric two-wheelers a year, a greenfield plant, 2,400 crore investment, 3,000 robots, and a completely automated production line, along with a complete manufacturing setup for components. 90% of the components are going to be made in that very complex, whether it be batteries, whether it be the motors or the electronics. And they will be launching with a capacity of 2 million in the next few months, they're saying. And from day one, they're talking of price parity with the IC two-wheeler. So that's a very interesting thing to watch, how this works out. And the existing manufacturers are quite concerned about it, that one of the two has got their arithmetic wrong. One person is talking of 100,000, 2,000, 200,000 a year, and here's this new person talking of 10 million a year. So something, both can't be right. So we should watch this space very closely. But with the kind of volume economies which Ola is planning, who knows what might happen. Coming to the next opportunity, it's in components. Now, the biggest or the most important components in an electric vehicle are the battery, the motor, the electronics. So it's a completely different, range of aggregates and components compared to a typical IC vehicle. It's a new chain completely. So there are many people entering this either in terms of batteries or in terms of the electric powertrain. Like Valeo has announced its entry with a 48-volt electric powertrain in lithium-ion batteries. Suzuki is joint venturing with Toshiba and Denso to put up a lithium-ion plant. So they're putting up the lithium-ion plant first, but they haven't talked about the vehicles so far. I'm sure they'll come at some stage. The third and the biggest opportunity is the charging infrastructure. Some companies like Tata Power have announced that they'll be putting up such charging infrastructure, but those numbers are relatively small. And the requirements, if you're talking of millions of vehicles, the number of charging points will also have to be equivalent to that. So there's a huge opportunity waiting to be filled up. And the one big announcement that has happened is in fact from Ola. They have announced that they're going to set up 100,000 charging points with an investment of $2 billion. 5,000 will be in year one, but the rest over 400 cities will be over the next 5 years. So by the time they reach their full capacity of whatever 10 million a year, they expect to have 100,000 charging points, which are exclusively for themselves. That means it's not a general standard, it is their proprietary standard, which they expect to put up. And the investment in charging is 2 billion, whereas on the main plant is 2,400 crores, which is like $300 million. So it's a very different scale and size, but this is the single largest gap in this whole ecosystem which needs to be filled up. The next is the sales and service network. The way these machines will be sold is potentially very different from the traditional IC engine vehicle. So whether you sell online or whether you have some offline space or some or you have an omni-channel, Bajaj Chetak has shown what is possible. Beyond that, you have all the connectivity apps, which is a wide open field. Mobility, I think you'll hear about it later on, because that is redefining that even if the EV is there, how will it be owned? How will it be used? How will it be sold? And lastly, you have the whole area of intelligent vehicles and autonomous vehicles, which will bring in a whole new set of people into the market, whether it be Apple and Google or Baidu and Huawei, and completely change the whole system. So I'll just sum up with 3 points which I have made. One is that once price parity and charging infrastructure comes in, we'll have an inflection point and a very rapid growth in the adoption of electric vehicles. Secondly, India is potentially the base for two-wheelers worldwide and for mass market four-wheelers, passenger cars. And thirdly, electric vehicles will redefine the entire auto ecosystem, creating opportunities for new and innovative products and services across the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raju. May I ask Gopi to present? I'm sorry, we are running a little behind time, but
no, thanks, Girija. It's always good to follow Raju, because then you can not cover any statistics. He's done such a fantastic job of it, and also shared some thoughts and opinions. So what I'll do, Girija, is we'll talk about a little zoom out vision of the same, and we'll start with energy and come down to opportunities. So there are some questions also in the Q&A box, which hopefully we'll be discussing as I go through. So the first question I would like to pose, not only to the panel as well as to the audience, is what is the case for electric? What is the case for electric in vehicles? What is the case for electric in vehicles in India? Obviously, there is a case, but we need to make sure that just because there is no smoke coming out of the tailpipe, we don't assume that it's all clean in every part of the world. So there is a question around this. So I'm happy that I had a slide straight off the bat to discuss it, which is, yes, India has a utility power of 400 gigawatts installed. And of that, 53.6% is coal-based. And a further 6.7 is gas based. And the renewable part, which will actually make it cleaner, is 35.9%. As you see, this is as of December 2019. So you can round up these numbers because they're never accurate. So coal can be placed at 55%, gas at, let's say, 7%, and renewable at 36% for sure. But few things to note: renewable at 36% is a large gain for wind and solar, but that gain has come not from coal, not from fossil fuel. Mostly it has come from hydro going down. Which is fair, because not many hydro plants are being added at this point. It is renewables which are being added, which are wind and solar, but also it's not impacting the overall mix by a lot. So this needs to shift considerably more to make sure that from a sustainability standpoint, we are talking about electric vehicles in the same with the same understanding. The case for electric definitely, though, is for cleaner cities, because emissions are not there in the cities, in highly populous places. So even if it is coal, the emissions are there, unfortunately, but they're away from the cities. So there is even today a case for cleaner cities and healthier lifestyles in the cities. But the case for a smaller hole in the ozone layer is yet to be made convincingly, but we'll get there. There is another family secret in India, which is that there are 100 gigawatts of diesel gensets running and providing backup power. Hopefully these are not going to be powering the electric vehicles, but you never know, because of the quality of availability of power in India. And at the same time, we talk about being surplus in power, which is nowhere the case. On a per capita basis, we are 1/4, let's say, of Europe. We are half that of the world, and we are 1/10 that of US. And in order to grow GDP, it is a direct relationship with energy. So we will actually add energy as we grow our GDP. We might do it in the more efficient way, but it will be added. But today, if you look at it, there are diesel gensets which do not run clean. So we need to be clear as to what is the case for electric vehicles. Today, it is cleaner cities. Of course, Raju also mentioned that the motors are much more efficient, upwards of 99% compared to IC engines. But we do have electricity transmission and distribution losses and so on and so forth. So it's a complex scenario, and the government has not done a thorough enough job to determine the true sustainability benefit of electric vehicles. Nevertheless, they have already made inroads, and rightfully so, and we will continue to accumulate benefits as we go forward. So just wanted to share a few thoughts also on hence what clean mobility in India would mean. I truly believe that there has to be a big play for public transportation. Without this, clean mobility in India will be very difficult to accomplish. Indian cities needs to target quadruple public mode of transportation. So that's from 10% of total trips. I'm being generous there. The number which is there out there is 7%. To 40% at least. Singapore is at 80%, and we have the ability to make it all electric because we are going to be starting pretty much from scratch. All the public transportation other than metros out there are really, really old. And then shared transportation can be mandated to be all electric and partially reliant on self-generated renewable power. So if you're depending on the 35% renewable power which is out there, it is not the most effective, efficient way of doing it. So if there is Ola, or if there is shared transportation which has vehicles parked in a particular location, if that luxury exists, then the rooftops and the acreage around it can be at least partially mandated to be used for self-generated renewable power. Two-wheelers, I think going forward can be mandated all to be electric. I think there's a good case for that, and partially at least reliant on self-generated renewable power. I see Raju smiling. Raju, I told you I'll share opinions, so I'm free to do that. Electric infrastructure, of course, I'm saying that even charging stations included should be focused on public transportation and partially reliant on generating its own renewable power. Because if you look at the vehicles, how they're parked in India today, and I'll come to that later, in apartment complexes, they do not have parking mostly inside the apartment complex. They're all over the roads. And Raju, if you're still in Bombay, you will agree that there is significant amount of parking all over the roads, and there is no way we can get electricity to those points in a efficient manner. So hence, I'm making a big play for public transportation. Of course, long distance travel and goods transport should look at hydrogen-based. Hydrogen, of course, again comes from fossil fuels if it is not from renewables and water splitting. So we need to be technically focused there as well and detailed enough to understand if you're talking hydrogen, again, from a sustainability standpoint, have a proper plan. But if not hydrogen, at least get off the roads those smoke spewing trucks for better vehicles which have better catalytic converters and so on and so forth. Of course, the government has put together some opportunities from their end, FAME, most recently also the hydrogen mission. But I think one of the things that we need to look at is how to get people to live closer to work. And maybe there could be tax breaks for living closer to work. Of course, the additional challenges are the fact that roads need improvement. Can't talk about vehicles without having the right roads. And I also already mentioned parking and non-availability in apartment living. So if we put the Western hat on and say that we are living in a house with a 2-car garage, and we have 2 plug points, and we'll charge the cars overnight on grid power, which is renewable. That scenario is not there in India today, and it will take some time to get there. So paying respect to where we are today is extremely critical as we go forward. Somebody also asked in the Q&A as to what is the startup activity in this space. there is a very low level of activity, I must say, compared to what it needs to be. On the background, I've used the McKinsey plot on what the investment activities were in 2019 in the automotive space in various areas. And I've put together a few of the startup activities which I have been exposed to directly. And you can see a lot of it is in smart mobility. This would include bicycles and commercial vehicles and cars which are connected and are able to provide that smart mobility, but also companies like Netradyne, which are looking at driver behavior and so on and so forth. Then there is a lot of activity, relatively speaking, within India in electrification. So Raju mentioned Ola Electric. There is Sun Mobility, which is Chetan Maini's company. He's the one who started Reva, which went into Mahindra's. There are smaller operations like Euler and BeLive, which Euler is all Sun Mobility and Euler are both in infrastructure. BeLive is again in electric cycles. So there is a lot of activity in two-wheelers and cycles in India, maybe rightfully so. There needs to be much more activity in both these areas, but also there needs to be much more activity in the connectivity IoT space. The companies which started there are disappearing for lack of finding the markets. And in the area of autonomous, of course, India is not a market really for fully autonomous. But for a driver assist and let's say cruise control assist kind of applications, it can be a market. There are very few companies there as well. So there needs to be a lot more activity in these two areas of connectivity and autonomous from a technology standpoint. I'll end with this slide, Girija, is that the opportunity is there. More so as we look at the pandemic and social distancing, there's a complete change in the scenario. There is going to be an increased demand for personal transportation as opposed to public transportation in the short run, which is counter to the sustainability possibilities as we go forward. But we need to get across that hump, and also there is a significant role the government can play in ensuring that the public transportation is something people will enjoy taking. Otherwise, there is no sustainability, electric or not, in a country like India. So that ties into climate change, the oil prices, and those aspects were discussed by Raju as well. There is a graying population, and their needs for transportation will be very different than wanting to take a private vehicle or drive themselves. Women decision makers, again, the first Reva was more driven by women and it was electric and women with children rather than men. So those aspects needs to be considered. From a technology standpoint, there is ample technology, right from computing to materials to fuels. But really it has to connect to the market needs. The market needs are moving from purely mobility to a combination of mobility and virtual presence, connected things, from connected people, and there is of course a need for near zero carbon energy. So with that, I'll stop and hand it back to you, Girija.
Thank you, Gopi. That was very interesting. Ilan, may I request you to bring up the rear, as they say, and the charging infrastructure, which we all have spoken about. You are the expert on it. So over to you. You are muted. Yes.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
That's great. Okay. So I'm going to discuss Chakratech. Chakratech is an Israeli company, although the name is related to India. So we focused on e-mobility, and specifically on fast DC charging. And I will explain first why it's critical. We all know that the EV revolution is moving very fast. India is a little bit late, but I do believe it will close the gap and move forward, as the government is very committed to that. it was already discussed. Basically, right now we see in the market three major, I would say, adaptation factor that the industry has to overcome. We discussed the price. We need to increase the range, and the charge time is too long and has to be shortened. Right now, the main target is reaching what we call fast charging in 15 minutes. And there are companies discussing shorter charging time, something in the range of 5 minutes. The main fear related to infrastructure is the fear of the driver that once his battery is low, it will take him a long time to charge and he will be stuck on the way. That is called range anxiety, and it's a major showstopper for EVs. Actually, most drivers, when you ask them why you don't buy EVs, they say, where are you going to charge it? So fast charging and deployment of fast charging is critical for the penetration of EV. Just to give you some numbers regarding the meaning of fast charging, here you see a table relating the time and the power that is needed to charge. You see that if we charge relatively slow, in 1 hour, we need about 50 kilowatt, but as the time goes down, we're going up in power. And if we speak about 15 minutes, we speak about 200 kilowatt charging power. That's a significant power level, which is not available everywhere, specifically in the distribution network. Just to, I don't know what is the typical apartment in Israel, in India, the consumption, but let's say in Israel, this is about somewhere between 70 to 100 apartments. So this is a significant power level, which is not available everywhere. There are areas like rural areas and even in the urban areas where it's very difficult and expensive to bring such a power level. And usually the chargers, they are not coming alone, they are in group, 2, 3, even 8 and 12 together. So the power level that fast DC charging needs are very, very high. The solution is what we call energy storage in the area of the charger. I think just to give you an example for that, we all know this device. Again, we need a strong current of water. We don't have enough water in the pipes, so we have our local storage in the toilet. So in many respects, this is a very good example of a similar problem. And you may say, we make the electricity tank, which is equivalent to the water tank used in the toilet. What is the problem with supporting fast charging? Just a moment. The problem is as follows. Typically, a fast charger charges 10 to 20 cars a day. And that means that this water tank or the electricity tank, the storage has to be drained and filled 20 times a day. This is a huge problem for batteries, since typically they have about 3,000 cycles. If we look about typical lithium-ion batteries, so 3,000 cycles divided by 20, you get 150 days. So overall, in such a local storage based on batteries, typically you will have to replace the batteries, let's say, on an annual basis. And this really increased the cost of operation and maintenance of such a device. In order to solve this problem, we developed this storage technology. It's used on a flywheel concept, and its main advantage, it has unlimited charging cycles, and basically it lives for 20 years. There's no replacement needed, and because of this, you have very low cost per cycle. Although the system is more expensive than batteries in terms of total cost of ownership or cost per cycles, is a very low cost system. Here you see a typical system. By the way, the guy that the guy in the white shirt is our VP marketing, and the guy near him is the CEO of Skoda. Maybe you know this, one of the brands of the Volkswagen Group. He's the ex-CEO of Skoda, and we cooperate with Skoda in Europe. A little bit about the economics. I did say that if you have a fast charging station, basically the first thing you consider, can I connect it to the grid? Yeah, before start playing with storage system, you have to consider if I can connect it to the grid. I don't know again the numbers in India, but in Europe, if your charging station is more than 200 meters from the nearest substation, actually storage system is more economical to you. Yeah, as you move further away from the substation, high power substation, you need storage is become more and more critical. So this is, I would say, competitor number one is just a grid upgrade. The second is using lithium-ion batteries. In terms of lithium-ion batteries, if you don't have a lot of cars, very small number of cars per day, no problem to use batteries. But if you have, let's say, more than 7 cars per day, you have a 5 years ROI compared to a system. So it makes sense. As the number of cars per day increases, the ROI is becoming shorter. Let's say in 15 cars, the ROI is about 3 years. The technology is also super green. Here you see a comparison that one of our customers in Europe, they have to report their carbon footprint. And you see that we are 23 times greener or lower carbon footprint compared to lithium-ion. It's a very green technology. Also, in terms of recycling, we are made out of metal, which is very easy material to recycle. I actually decided not to use composite material in our product because they are very difficult to recycle. Here you see several sites, all of them in Europe. You see here a site in Austria, in the Czech Republic, in Italy, and a site in Germany. We plan early next year to have 2 installations in the US, one with Blink, which is the second largest charging network in the US, and Arco. Arco is the seventh largest gas station, and they are positioned in the middle of the US, where the electricity is very scarce. Yeah, if you think about the shores, both the west and the east, they are very populated areas and very I would say dense electric grid. But in the middle of the countries, I would say in the Midwest, I almost say it's like a third world country, although it's the US, and that's where Arco are based, and that's why we signed with them. This is an installation we did in Germany. It's in an underground parking lot. And this is our new product. This is a charging station with 4 fast charger, and it has 2 of our system. It's a 100, each one is a 100 kilowatt system, and we have 2 of them. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you very much, Iran. That was really very interesting. You are already doing it. That makes it that much more interesting. It's already implemented. But
Yes.
let's take some questions. Prashant, you want to handle some of the questions?
Sure, I can go with the first question and then
Yes.
go from there. So, guys, we have in our audience a whole bunch of entrepreneurs, And auto and mobility tends to be an incumbents game and big companies coming in. So can you share some thoughts on what are some of the things that entrepreneurs should be careful about or be thinking about as they try to scale their businesses against all the incumbents? And this is open to anybody in the panel who wants to answer.
So I can start from an India entrepreneur standpoint. And Prashant, I think at least part of your question is related to startups. And the opportunity recently for startups in the past decade has been microcapitalism, which means that with very little capital, you can start off, show proof of concept, and scale based on venture capital funding, and later IPO if you get there, great. And that kind of a journey is very different. Let's say a tech company becoming $15 billion valuation, with software which connects students and teachers. That journey is very different than if you want to get into a space like automotive, electric vehicles, even including charging infrastructure. Ilan will, I'm sure, tell you that it requires patience, it requires technical depth. And it requires good amount of funding in order to finally penetrate the market. So be ready for the long haul and be ready for the satisfaction of success at the end of it with your efforts.
If I may add, I agree with everything said before, but I see two conditions for a success of startup. External condition. The first thing is, yes, you need a technological change, which we have in this market. The second is market structure change, because if you have the old players, they like to buy from the old suppliers. But if you have a new market structure, new entrant in all levels, new car manufacturers, new OEMs, and that happens in this market. For example, in the charging space, there was a new layer of what is called CPO, charge point operators, which are totally new companies. Some of them were bought by the traditional players, but you have a new companies, and they are ready to buy and take their chance with the startup, which for established big players is more difficult.
Yeah, Prashant, I'll just top up Ilan's comment there that also I would request Indian corporations, larger companies, to work with startups in a fair manner, which is to say that there is enough happening there, which is let's look and see what we can learn and gain from the startup ecosystem, but we'll go and do it ourselves. That kind of bad behavior is there. There are good companies as well, no question, but I would like larger companies to know that it's their responsibility to make sure that these succeed.
Okay, I think there is a question I see on implementing a charger, batteries, interchangeable batteries. Can you, Raju, can you give us some views of what is the economics of these interchangeable batteries, where you interchange batteries and then charge them separately?
See, the answer is different for two-wheelers and for passenger cars. In the case of two-wheelers, a bit of that is already happening. When you have an electric two-wheeler, it's relatively easy to have a separate compartment for a battery and take it out at night, get it charged. So you got all these things happening. But in the case of a passenger car, the battery part of it is distributed all over. So this whole idea of replacing it overnight or going to a point and replacing it is, I think, very difficult. I haven't seen anybody really do it successfully. So that's the short answer. Two-wheelers, probably yes, but four-wheelers, whoever I've talked to, they said, look, it's just not going to work out.
So Girija, I do have a thought. The reason for swappable batteries and the discussion which it entered into the regulatory framework as well was to make the capital cost lower. So the idea was that we'll sell the vehicle without the battery. The battery will be leased. And so the overall vehicle cost will come down. I totally agree with Raju. I don't think that is the right approach. I don't know all the details of what they thought through. Just the fear that be long lines of people waiting to swap their batteries because you don't run on a charge like you run on a tank full of diesel or petrol. So just that thought process, I'm not sure I understand completely.
I think there's one more question on, this is probably the last two questions we'll take before we go, is on commercial passenger vehicles. I mean, we have seen Tesla and all talking about trucks and things. Okay, do you see that there will be commercial vehicles also on electric vehicles?
I'll try to answer that. You know, the light trucks as a category, you'll be seeing electric vehicles coming out in the USA, particularly in the course of the next 12 months. So the light commercial vehicle part of it, especially for within city, duty cycle, I think is just about a year away. In fact, Tata Motors has already announced an electric truck to be launched later in this year. So they had a concept vehicle earlier. So I can see it coming. So as long as it's within the city, the charging points are well known and the daily run is above, say, 100 kilometers, the economics work out even at today's sort of rates. But in 3 to 5 years, definitely it will happen. So in India, the commercial vehicles, you have small commercial vehicles which go into every little, lane and so on. That is a definite possibility. Sometimes you have 3-wheelers there. Sometimes you have small 4-wheelers there. Then you have the light commercial vehicles, medium commercial vehicles, and the heavy trucks. The heavy trucks is the most difficult part. There, whether it will be, because that is intercity. But intra-city, all these things, and the buses. I didn't have time to talk about buses. But again, the bus as an application is entirely amenable for electric vehicles. So these intra-city applications, I see it all happening in the next few years. The only thing where there is uncertainty is the long distance heavy truck movements.
There's also the hydrogen fuel cell, which is longer term for intercity. And there are countries where there is excess power during summer from hydroelectricity, which can be converted into hydrogen as a storage. Hydrogen doesn't exist, so it's just like a carrier anyway. So so those kinds of solutions in limited pockets can find application, because in India we also have factories where hydrogen sometimes is just burnt off. And those kind of situations can be leveraged for local transportation of goods within those, let's say, plants and so on and so forth. Very specific solutions are possible, but otherwise a little bit away.
Kopi, just a final question for you. There is a question here saying that how do we, the large companies, sort of encourage these startups? Because there is going to be a lot of disruption in this area and startups are really good vehicles for that. And we have not seen that happening even in the IT services. The large companies really have not. The small ones and the startups have done it themselves. How do we get the large companies, and I know you raised this issue a little bit, how do we get them to actually encourage this ecosystem of small companies? I think there's a question from Ganesh Natarajan.
Yeah, I think their responsibility also lies with the startups to make meaningful contributions. I think we're getting there. More and more Indian startups are being started by people who are coming out of premium colleges, people who are hands-on, people who are doing this after some experience in the industry. So the startups are actually not fly-by-night. They're making meaningful contributions. Now, from an industry standpoint, there are models which can be leveraged. Some of the MNCs in India, I'm on the board of Bosch. Bosch has a great program for startups and have launched startups. Tata Group, including, for example, Tata Elxsi, on which I was on the board, and Girija, we were both on the Tata Com board as well. There's a lot of encouragement for startups from funding, but more importantly, providing access to the market. And together, there is a win-win which happens. And we have seen that. So I think more Indian companies, larger companies need to participate in a similar manner.
Correct. Okay, I think we are running out of time now. Siddhi, do you want to, Siddhi, are you there?
Yes, Girija, I'm here.
Okay.
So this was a really interesting session. Thank you, Girija, for having such an engrossed session, and thank you all the panelists. We had a very interactive audience as well. 13 questions. So we'll make sure, audience, that the panelists receive your questions, and as soon as we get an answer back from them, we'll share it with the audience as well. Number two, we had questions related to the recording. So we'll share the recording with TiE Global and the chairs of SIG, and then we would request them to further share it with the audience. With that, I would like to thank everyone to spend their evening with us for the sustainability challenge. Thank you, Girija. Thank you, panelists and the co-chairs, for making an engrossing session. Before I leave, I'm requesting all with one appeal. Everyone knows how the situation is in India right now. So TiE globally, we have created this initiative where we are contributing and collecting funds to help provide oxygen concentrators, ventilators, whatever medical equipment India needs right now. I'll be sharing the link here. We really appreciate if, wait, I can't share it here. It's too long a message. What I'll do is I'll share it with the audience and the panelists, and would really request all of you to contribute as much as you can. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Raju.
Bye, Giri.
Bye.